In the sumptuous halls of the royal palace in Jerusalem, a story echoed that deeply touched the hearts of all who heard it. It was the story of Mephibosheth, whose name carried the weight of his destiny, the one who spread shame. Grandson of King Saul and son of Jonathan, his life was marked by a tragedy that would change his path forever. When he was just 5 years old, on a day that began like any other, devastating news arrived from the battlefield. His father Jonathan and his grandfather Saul had fallen in combat. In the chaos that followed, his nurse, overcome by panic, picked him up in her arms and fled in a hurry. In her desperate haste, she stumbled, and the fall had irreversible consequences. The little prince was crippled in both feet. That fall not only injured his body, but also drastically altered his destiny. From heir to the throne to a young man marked by disability, Mephibosheth would begin a journey that would take him from the depths of despair to the unexpected heights of divine grace. No one could have imagined that that moment of tragedy would be just the beginning of an extraordinary story of redemption, which would span generations and touch countless lives in the kingdom of Israel. In Lo-debar, an arid and forgotten land in the far reaches of Israel, Mephibosheth grew up far from the eyes of the royal court. Under the care of Machir, son of Ammiel, the young prince learned to live with his limitations in a society that valued strength and physical perfection. Each dawn brought with it the weight of being a fallen prince, hidden in the shadows of oblivion. From the window of his modest home, he watched the children run and play freely, an activity that for him would remain only a distant dream. Questions tormented his restless mind. Why, God? Why was I torn from the palace to live in this exile? What purpose could there be in so much suffering? The years passed slowly in Lo-debar, a word that ironically meant place without pasture, a perfect reflection of the aridity that Mephibosheth felt in his soul. His mornings were marked by the daily struggle to perform the simplest tasks, and his nights were filled with bitter memories of what could have been. Stories circulated among the locals about the new king, David, who had established his kingdom in Jerusalem. Some said he was hunting down the last of Saul's descendants, others spoke of his mercy. For Mephibosheth, every mention of David's name brought a mixture of fear and curiosity. In his lonely nights, while others slept, he would allow himself to dream of the stories he had heard about his father, Jonathan, and his legendary friendship with David. But these moments of reverie were quickly replaced by the harsh reality of his condition. He was just a crippled prince, hiding in the shadows of a kingdom that should once have been his. What Mephibosheth did not know was that even in his hiding place in Lo-debar, the invisible threads of divine providence were weaving a destiny far different from what he could have imagined. A radical change was about to happen, and it would come from a wholly unexpected source. On a seemingly ordinary morning in Lo-debar, the arid ground shook under the galloping of royal horses. A cloud of dust on the horizon announced the arrival of a procession that would forever change Mephibosheth's destiny. The locals, unaccustomed to official visits, watched in amazement as the soldiers carrying David's royal standard approached. Mephibosheth's heart raced as the horses' hooves stopped in front of his door. His thoughts raced wildly. Has my time come? Is this the end of my story? Years of fear and anticipation converged on this moment. A soldier with a stern appearance but a surprisingly gentle voice delivered the seemingly impossible message. King David requests your presence in Jerusalem. The journey to the palace was a mixture of terror and anticipation. Each jolt of the chariot sent waves of anxiety through his already weakened body. Mephibosheth mentally rehearsed his last words, imagining that he would be executed like other descendants of Saul. What he didn't know was that King David's heart held a secret that stemmed from an ancient promise. Upon entering the throne room, Mephibosheth immediately prostrated himself, his face touching the cold marble floor. The silence that followed seemed endless, until David's voice, filled with unexpected emotion, filled the room. Mephibosheth, son of my beloved friend Jonathan. Lifting his head slightly, still trembling, Mephibosheth met not the stern gaze of a vengeful king, but the compassionate eyes of one who regarded him with genuine affection. David continued, his voice choked with emotion, "Do not be afraid. Today I fulfill a promise I made to your father. All of Saul's land will be yours again, and you will have a permanent place at my table, as one of my own sons." Confused and overwhelmed, Mephibosheth could barely process what was happening. "Who is your servant," he stammered, "that you care about a dead dog like me?" His words revealed years of distorted self-perception, shaped by isolation and rejection. What Mephibosheth did not yet understand was that this moment marked only the beginning of a much deeper transformation. A new life awaited him, But with it would come challenges that would test not only his loyalty but also his ability to accept and understand the true meaning of grace. Mephibosheth's first days in the palace were a disconcerting mix of wonder and discomfort. Servants rushed to attend to him at every sign of warning. His robes were now the finest linen, and his seat at the royal table was permanently reserved for the king's right hand. But the transition from a life of hiding to the spotlight of the court was not an easy one. Each meal at the palace brought new challenges. Mephibosheth had to learn to navigate not only the customs of the court but also his own insecurities. The curious gazes of courtiers followed him, some with compassion, others with barely concealed disdain. "Do I really belong here?" he asked himself constantly as he tried to handle the cutlery with the dignity expected of someone at the king's table. David, sensing his discomfort, often sought to include him in conversations, sharing stories about Jonathan. "Your father," the king said, his eyes shining with emotion, "was the noblest man I have ever known. His loyalty and courage live on through you now." These words, though comforting, also weighed on Mephibosheth with an added responsibility. During his lonely nights in the royal chambers, far more luxurious than his former home in Lo-debar, Mephibosheth struggled with conflicting thoughts. David's kindness was genuine, he could not deny that, but years of self-loathing do not disappear overnight. Sometimes he would wake with a start, fearing that it was all an elaborate dream. It was during one of these sleepless nights that Mephibosheth had an unexpected encounter in the palace gardens. One of David's war veterans, also scarred by battle, shared a life-changing perspective with him. "Your limitations do not define your worth in the eyes of God or the king. It is your presence here that honors your father's memory and demonstrates David's faithfulness." Slowly, Mephibosheth began to understand that his new position was not just about privilege, but about purpose. However, the true test of his transformation was about to come, when a crisis in the kingdom would threaten everything he had achieved. When Absalom's rebellion broke out, the palace was thrown into chaos. David, forced to flee Jerusalem in haste, left behind a divided kingdom and troubled hearts. For Mephibosheth, this moment represented more than a political crisis. It was the ultimate test of his gratitude and loyalty. Ziba, his servant, saw the confusion as an opportunity for deception. Presenting himself before David during his flight, he brought provisions and a poisonous lie. "Mephibosheth has remained in Jerusalem, for he thinks that today the house of Israel will restore to him the kingdom of his father." Ziba's words were like poisoned daggers, planting doubts in David's already wounded heart. In reality, Mephibosheth had remained in Jerusalem not by choice but by impossibility. Ziba, in leaving with the animals that could have carried him, had deliberately left his master behind. Trapped in his physical condition and betrayed by his own servant, Mephibosheth lived days of profound anguish, his heart broken between the helplessness of his situation and the pain of being misunderstood by David. During the long days of the king's absence, Mephibosheth expressed his grief in visible ways. He neglected to take care of his appearance, trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes. Each day that passed was marked not by concern for his property or status, but by genuine anguish for David's well-being. When the rebellion was finally quelled and David returned victorious to Jerusalem, the moment of truth arrived. Mephibosheth was summoned before the king to explain his actions. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with the weight of possible consequences. The courtiers watched intently, curious to see how the king would deal with this apparent betrayal. With tears in his eyes and a voice choked with emotion, Mephibosheth appeared before David, his unkempt appearance testifying to his grief. What would follow would be an extraordinary demonstration of a heart transformed by grace, but also a moment of decision that would reveal the true nature of his transformation. Standing before the throne, Mephibosheth faced the most crucial moment of his life. With a trembling but firm voice, he spoke his truth. "My lord and king, my servant has deceived me. For your servant said, 'I will saddle a donkey and ride with the king, because I am lame.' But Ziba has slandered me before the king." David, still processing the complexity of the situation, pronounced his judgment. "You and Ziba will divide the land." It was a decision that might have seemed fair in the eyes of many, but it still carried the weight of a veiled distrust. It was at this moment that the true transformation in Mephibosheth's heart was revealed in a more profound way. With a nobility that surprised everyone present, Mephibosheth responded, "Let him have everything, for it is enough for me that my lord and king has returned in peace to his home." His words, free of any bitterness or resentment, demonstrated a soul that had truly understood the meaning of grace. The silence that followed in the royal hall was deafening. The courtiers, accustomed to intrigues and disputes over power and property, could not understand such selflessness. The one who had once considered himself a dead dog now demonstrated a royal dignity that transcended material possessions. David's eyes, brimming with tears, met Mephibosheth's. In that moment, the king recognized in Jonathan's son not only the reflection of his late friend's nobility, but a man who had been profoundly transformed by the power of grace and unconditional love. This scene would forever mark the history of Israel, not for the disputed lands or the drama of betrayal, but for the living testimony of how love and grace can transform a broken heart into a vessel of honor. Yet Mephibosheth's journey still held one last, profound lesson about the true meaning of divine redemption. Mephibosheth's story echoed through the generations in Israel not only as a tale of political redemption, but as a powerful testimony to God's transforming grace. In the quiet evenings of the palace, now truly his home, Mephibosheth often reflected on his extraordinary journey. The one who bore the name that meant spreader of shame had become a living symbol of restored honor. His daily presence at the king's table was no longer marked by insecurity or fear, but by a deep gratitude and understanding of unconditional love, both human and divine. In his conversations with the young men of the palace, Mephibosheth shared his story with a new perspective. My physical limitations, which I once saw as a curse, became a testimony to God's grace. For it was in my weakness that his strength was made perfect. His words deeply touched those who struggled with their own limitations and wounds. The transformation in his life became a powerful metaphor for God's redeeming love. Just as David sought him out when he was hiding in Lo-debar, so God seeks out those who are lost and broken. Just as he was raised from the dust to the king's table, so all who humble themselves before God can be exalted by his grace. The true miracle was not in the healing of his legs, which remained crippled, but in the healing of his heart, which learned to see beyond physical circumstances. His disability, once a source of shame, became a channel to demonstrate that a person's worth lies not in their physical perfection, but in their heart transformed by grace. In the years that followed, Mephibosheth's story continued to inspire generations. His testimony reminded everyone that no matter their limitations or background, there is always a place at the table of the King of Kings for those who accept his invitation of love. And so the man who once thought his life was limited to the shadow of tragedy discovered that God can use our greatest weaknesses to reveal his greatest glory. For, in the words Mephibosheth often shared, it is not our abilities that define our worth, but the love of him who calls us by name and invites us to his table. What did you think of today's story here at Infinite Prayer? Please tell us in the comments which part of this story of profound transformation through grace touched you the most. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the notification bell, and also remember to like and share this video with someone you know who needs to hear this story today. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow in our next video.